I mean, I want to preface that in saying that what you're experiencing is very true. And there are things that, I can say my white friends could look at a situation and not be able to see the um, same type of situation play out the way that I would.
Like they interpret it differently.
Exactly. They would interpret it differently. And, I think that it's very important to understand the different perspectives we were coming from. With that said, this idea of ethnic Gnosticism is that you, as a white person, aren't able to access the understandings on any level that I am because you're not Black. And that's a very dangerous place to sit, I think.
Yeah.
I think the implications that you don't have the empathy to understand certain things is super dangerous when moving forward as a collective. Like I definitely understand that there are things and situations that you have never experienced in your life that I have. That is true. There are situations where, something could play out and you wouldn't perceive it the same as I would. And wrong or right, it's still very true, and it's still very important to understand people's perspectives. But to say that you don't understand something because you're not Black is very pointed, I think, and very could be a very slippery slope. Like I think that empathy has a long reach, and I think it's very clear that we live different lives. That's not being disputed, but for you to not understand what human rights look like would be I think a poor vote on my part, and that's very dangerous and exclusive. And I think that gets away from the purpose. Like one of the things I was talking to my friend about was how Black Lives Matter, the movement, obviously has to do with racial equality, but specifically Black Lives Matter has to do with police brutality against Black people. That's what the movement is about. And I think that it's just a small portion of a bigger picture. Like it goes deeper than just police brutality. Like it's a systemic issue within all the different systems that we contribute in our society. And I think after Black Lives Matter, you have racial equality, and you have conversations where it's understanding the difference between different cultures. Because one thing I think that I've learned is how silly of a concept race is, but how important of a concept cultures are. People have different cultures and they arrive to different personal needs in different ways because of that. And those all come with their own pros and cons, and we can learn and share from those. But to think that we're divided because of some race, that like I forgive me, like I'm not a historian, but like I'm pretty sure race was created during the Spanish Inquisition, and they're trying to decide who had certain religious beliefs against another, and like that's.
Don't look at me for reassurance.
No.
Right, Daniel? I'm like, I don't know.
But I'm pretty sure that's like, I mean, you could quote me or whatever, but don't quote me, please don't quote me. But I'm pretty sure that's where race, the idea of differentiating people based on race came from, and that's not a thing. That's not a real.
It can easily be an unhelpful dichotomy. Right?
It's just
unhelpful
it's just,
categorization.
Yeah, it's not a helpful categorization. To understand someone from their culture makes a lot more sense. You know, so
right. And I think just to like you were talking about, going back, you were talking about how it's a dangerous thing, right? To think that that I could never, that somebody who is non-Black could never understand what it's like to be Black.
Yeah.
And I think but as myself of like what I said before of like kind of recognizing I don't have this radar for microaggressions or see it or experience it myself. That like I think it could be dangerous. But like what we do with that, because like my experience is still my experience, your experience is still your experience. But if then by thinking my experience invalidates your experience, right, or invalidates your interpretation, then it gets really either way, right?
Either way,
you're like,
exactly.
So in that And
like
I
the whole
think,
thing, like all lives matter, like that whole idea, like it just doesn't butt heads,
mm,
like it's not about all lives, it's about just raising awareness about Black lives, but like you said,
mm-hmm,
if you're not listening to
mm-hmm,
someone else's opinion, then
yeah,
it's not going to work.
and believing, I think, right? Believing
Well,
their
trying to
opinion.
understand,
Yeah,
like at least trying to understand, like really
yeah,
making the effort to listen, I think.
yeah.
Yeah. That is a daunting question. Just just educating yourself, like that's kind of where it starts, like this whole, like having this conversation, this whole social dialogue is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
um but I really caution people not to turn it into a hashtag, and just
Mm,
talk about it because that's the topic of conversation, or just
right.
because there's no sports on right now, or just because of whatever. I think that a more important piece of this, the next step of this, is going to have to be an internal conversation. Somebody who's going out of their way to learn on behalf of themselves,
Mm,
um, because that's how you move as when multiple people do that. That's how
mm,
you end up moving as a collective, and really understanding and sharing and listening, like we were talking about. And I think that the only way that you can change your actions is by changing your perspective. And the only way that you can change your perspective is by educating yourself. So that, I
mm,
think, it just kind of makes sense that way. And I think that if I was to say anything for the white community, that's what it would be. It's just like, educate yourself, because there's been a lot of miseducation. Like that's kind of been the root of a lot of these issues. It's been miseducation
right,
versus education. Like
right.
history is always written by the victor, and that should explain a lot of things.
Mm,
So if you can look at things from the perspective, like you said, of things being systemic,
mm,
um, and continue to research, I think you'll be able to notice those little microaggressions that you say you don't notice. I think they'll start to pop up a lot more often.
mm,
And like for me, um, at that point, I gotta arm myself and figure out how I can approach those situations and those
mm,
conversations. Um, I think with that education, I have to be, or at least for me personally, I feel the responsibility to educate myself as well, and be
mm,
there when someone wants to have that conversation,
right.
and be able to have some answers,
Yeah.
to some degree. And obviously I don't have all the answers, but I want to prepare myself as much as I can. And I think that's just a daily thing in general.
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
any sense at all.
Hmm. Feels like a tricky question because I don't
It's a good
think.
time for me to take a sip.
Yeah, you go for it. Um, I don't feel like I'm in a position that I could say I need something from Black Canadians. I think that like what's helpful for me individually in my own process with regards to race and racism in Canada, and how I on an individual level like contribute to systemic racism, like what's helpful for me in that process and that journey, I think is um to for me to not feel accused by Black people for things that to not feel blamed, for me to not be blamed for something that a particular action that somebody else is doing. I think I don't personally feel blamed. I think in with certain conversations and certain that it can be, it can tend towards that maybe. Um, there's no one in my life right now like pointing their finger at me saying, you know, I'm a violent policeman, white policeman, right? Or what, or that because I'm white, I'm bad. But um, so I think just like I think bringing it down, being able to bring it down to the individual level, right? Of like that, like okay, my experience is my experience, and what can I do in my individual experience towards what's happening versus like um, taking blame for what me personally taking blame for what collectively or systemically is happening,
Sure.
right? I think to continue to be included in some way, I guess, like in order. I feel like language is getting tricky of like the right way to say it, but I want to stay connected to these conversations, you
Hmm.
know, and be actually to be listened to in terms of my own experience, right? That's just a human thing, and that's part of the whole problem on the other side, right? But in terms of my process moving forward is to be able to engage in conversation and be able to not just listen, which is a really important part of what's happening, but like for me to also be listened to and to feel understood in my own experience as well.